First, the news.
BBC News with Michael Poles. France says its fighter aircraft have destroyed at least 5 Libyan government warplanes and 2 helicopters in an attack on the forces of Colonel Gaddafi. A French spokesman said the aircraft was destroyed at the airbase at the town of Misrata as they were preparing to carry out operations in the region. Hugh Schofield reports from Paris.
The Defence Ministry in Paris says that some 20 French aircraft flew sorties on Saturday in support of the UN Libya resolution. They carried out strikes around Zintan and Misrata, towns in the west of the country that are in the hands of the rebels but under threat from Colonel Gaddafi. This is the biggest strike count for French jets since the start of the mission a week ago, and a sign that the coalition is also trying to tip the balance of strength in favour of the rebels in the west of the country, as it appears to have done in the east at Benghazi and Ajdabiya.
Rebels in eastern Libya said they are close to retaking the strategic town of Brega after earlier recapturing Ajdabiya from government forces. There have been more anti-government protests in Syria. Crowds have taken to the streets in the coastal city of Latakia and in the southern towns of Tufus and Deraa. Owen Bennett-Jones reports.
Latakia, one of Syria's best-known coastal tourist resorts, has been the scene of anti-government protests, a rooftop shooting by unidentified gunmen and the burning down of the ruling party headquarters. Government officials have blamed the violence there on a Sunni cleric who they say wanted to incite sectarian strife. Ba'ath Party buildings were also attacked in the town of Tafas, south of the capital. In Deraa, which up until now has seen the biggest protests, the authorities today pulled back security forces and allowed mourners to attend funeral processions for those killed on Friday. Residents say more than 1,000 people have reoccupied the main mosque in the town.
The Palestinian Hamas movement that controls the Gaza Strip has agreed with other militant groups to stop firing rockets into Israel, providing Israeli forces stop targeting Gaza. The agreement came during talks aimed at restoring calm with Israel after recent confrontations left 10 Palestinians dead. Militants in Gaza have fired over 80 rockets and mortars over the border in the past week. More than 250,000 people from around Britain have taken part in a march and rally in central London to protest against the public spending cuts introduced by the coalition government. The main march was peaceful, but some protesters broke away to attack property in a main shopping district. More than 150 people were arrested. Brendan Barber, leader of the main umbrella body of British unions, distanced himself from the violence.
These things are nothing to do with the TUC, and I regret very much that the actions of a few hundred people there risk taking attention away from the hundreds of thousands of people who've taken part entirely peacefully in the protests that we've organised.
This is the World News from the BBC. Tens of thousands of people have taken part in marches across Spain to demand an end to what they call permissive abortion legislation. Laws that came into effect last year eased restrictions on abortion, allowing terminations in the first 14 weeks of pregnancy, 22 weeks if there's no threat to the life or health of the mother. In Germany, protesters have staged what they said was the country's biggest ever demonstration against nuclear power. Around 200,000 people took part in 4 cities. Nuclear energy has become a major political issue in Germany since the crisis in Japan and could influence a big regional election on Sunday. Here's Sam Wilson of our Europe desk.
Protesters said they wanted Germany's nuclear plants switched off for good. They're not convinced by Chancellor Angela Merkel's extra safety checks on German reactors, believing it's a political manoeuvre to influence the critical state election in Baden-Württemberg. Her party's held the southern state for 6 decades, but could lose it to the Green Party amid a surge of anti-nuclear sentiment, a result that would leave her politically weakened.
The first woman to stand as a vice presidential candidate for a major political party in the United States, Geraldine Ferraro, has died in Boston. She was 75. Ms. Ferraro, a Democratic Party congresswoman, was catapulted to national prominence when she became the running mate of the 1984 presidential nominee Walter Mondale. Mr. Mondale told the BBC she'd been a champion for social justice and a pioneer for women's rights. The BBC Russian service has made its last radio broadcast after 65 years. The Russian language service was set up in 1946 and enjoyed an audience of millions during the Cold War. After the collapse of communism, it was rebroadcast on radio stations across Russia, but partnerships suffered as relations between London and Moscow deteriorated. A limited audio service will continue to be broadcast via the internet on bbcrussian.com. BBC News.
It's 23:06 GMT. You're listening to The World Today from the BBC World Service with Oliver Conway. After coalition airstrikes allowed rebel gains in the east of Libya, French warplanes have turned their attention to Misrata in the west. The French armed forces said that in the past 24 hours they destroyed 5 Libyan planes and 2 helicopters at the city's airbase. A spokesman said the aircraft had been preparing to carry out attacks. Colonel Gaddafi's forces have been pounding rebels in Misrata for weeks. One resident there told the BBC the opposition fighters were struggling.
Looks like the Gaddafi's troops still have the upper hand, and they have unlimited supply of ammunition, and the rebels and the people here are totally panicked, and they have the limited ammunition, and I don't know how long the city gonna last against this strong and fierce attack.
Shortly before we came on air, I spoke to our correspondent in Paris, Hugh Schofield, and asked him for more details of the French operation.
This is quite a terse statement which just came out on the internet from the Defence Ministry, but it does say just that there were 7 aircraft, at least 7 aircraft destroyed by French jets, 5 aeroplanes, 5 jets, and 2 helicopters which were on the ground at or near Misrata, and which the French say were apparently about to be or going to be used in operations well, it doesn't say at Misrata, but one can assume at Misrata, because we know that Misrata is a town in the hands of the rebels, which is now becoming a bit of a sort of focal point because it is under attack from Colonel Gaddafi's forces, and I think we can assume that this is an attack to sort of, try to tip the balance in favour of the rebels, in the same way that, air power has tipped the balance in favour of the rebels much further to the east, around Ajdabia and Benghazi.
And it highlights once again that the French are leading this operation.
Yes, I mean, in a sense, they are. I mean, they very much like to think they are, and it's true that a lot of the action against tanks and armoured vehicles and so on around flashpoints have been carried out by French jets. The heavy lifting of the coalition attacks on air defences, of course, have been carried out by missile attacks by the Americans, the British and so on, but I mean the sort of day-to-day stuff does seem to be carried out by effectively by the French, operating from their aircraft carrier fleet, which is off Libya now. So I mean, yes, they are very much in the forefront of this, and I think it is significant that the sort of emphasis seems to be shifting now from the east of the country to the west. I mean, reading between the lines, it suggests that there's a sort of a flush of sort of success in the east of the country after the retaking of Ajdabia, maybe of Braga, and now that they're moving to these places much further, much closer to Tripoli, which are in the hands of the rebels, but which are also under attack from Gaddafi, in which the French and the coalition clearly feels can be saved and can mark a sort of a point for the rebels over in that part of the country.
Hugh Schofield. Well, over in the east, the Libyan rebels have regained territory they lost earlier in the month. Our correspondent Kevin Connolly told us what happened when rebels moved into the town of Ajdabia.
I think there's no doubt that when the fall of Ajdabia finally came after a week of fighting, it was quick and it was brutal, and it was all about the application of Allied air power. On the ground there you see plenty of destroyed Libyan government armoured vehicles. Gaddafi's forces were substantially degraded, I think, and they refused, we are told, to surrender. We've been told that by rebel commanders. The rebels themselves then moved into town, but I think it's very much the case that those forces were substantially defeated, if not utterly destroyed, by the application of Allied air power. And of course the rebels see in Ajdabia in all sorts of ways a template for what might happen elsewhere in the country.
And that was Kevin Connolly. And tonight the rebels say they have advanced further westward along the coastal road from Ajdabir and are now threatening Brega. Violence has again flared in Syria, a day after at least 20 people were killed in anti-government protests in the southern town of Daraa. Reports from the coastal city of Latakia speak of heavy gunfights, with snipers on rooftops opening fire on protesters. Angry crowds there also set fire to the offices of the governing Ba'ath Party. There were also protests in another town in the area, Al Sanamain. One resident told us what happened there.
About 30,000 people were going on a burial ceremony for the martyrs who were killed yesterday. They were shooting us. We have no weapons. We have no stones, no sticks even. We were armless. We were asking for some rights. We are in a very bad situation now. There's no entries to our city, and you can't go out. Even doctors can't come in the city, can't go to the hospital to help the injured people. We are in a very serious situation.
A resident of Al Sanamain. Well, Caroline Hawley has been following developments in Syria and has this report.
It was in Deraa that protests in Syria first began after school children were arrested for writing pro-democracy graffiti. The unrest has spiraled into the biggest challenge of Bashar al-Assad's rule. He sought to placate the protesters with promises of reform in one of the most tightly controlled countries in the Middle East. 260 political prisoners have been released, but the unrest is continuing and spreading. There's been new bloodshed in the coastal city of Latakia, where the offices of the ruling Ba'ath Party were also set ablaze. President Assad's advisor Buthaina Shaban has spoken of foreign schemes to destabilize the country. But with a growing toll of dead and injured, there's been a chorus of condemnation of how the Syrian authorities have responded to this month's unprecedented protests.
That report by Caroline Hawley. The nuclear leaks at the Fukushima plant in Japan have renewed anxiety around the world about the safety of nuclear power, and perhaps nowhere more so than in Germany. Today's demonstrations in Berlin and Hamburg were witness to that, with more than 200,000 people protesting against nuclear power. Ulrike Avenhaus was among them.
Fukushima hat uns allen gezeigt, dass es eben doch ein Risiko gibt.
Fukushima showed to everyone that there are risks after all, and that we should probably reconsider whether our nuclear plants are as safe as politicians always tell us. Each and every nuclear plant is a source of danger and can potentially blow up. That's why they all need to be shut down.
Well, here's our Berlin correspondent, Stephen Evans.
It's impossible to estimate exact numbers, but the organisers say that all told, 250,000 people took part. They protested with periods of silence in memory of the current disaster in Japan, and also with much chanting of Fukushima Chernobyl, bracketing the Japanese disaster with the one in Ukraine in 1986, from which radiation spread to Germany. 6 months ago, Chancellor Merkel reversed the previous government's policy by deciding to extend the lives of Germany's 17 nuclear plants. After the events in Japan, she then decided to put the extension on hold, pending a review of safety. The oldest nuclear power stations would close. Opinion polls indicate that her change of mind on nuclear power is seen by most Germans as a political tactic before a big regional election. One of her ministers is reported to have said privately that the change was politically driven. The size of the latest demonstrations indicate that nuclear power is back at the top of the political agenda.
Stephen Evans in Berlin. You're listening to the BBC World Service. A reminder of our main news. France says its warplanes have destroyed 7 Libyan government aircraft preparing to carry out attacks at rebel-held Misrata in the west of Libya. Protesters drumming their way through the streets of London today. They were joined by more than 250,000 people voicing their anger against the largest government spending cuts since the Second World War. However, despite the protests being largely peaceful, several hundred people broke away from the main march, attacking banks and shops in the main commercial district of London. By mid-afternoon, a group who campaign against government cuts and corporate tax avoidance under the banner UK Cut occupied the luxury food store Fortnum and Mason, spraying graffiti and the police surrounded the shopfront. Well, for a look back at what went on today, here's our correspondent Rob Watson.
It's been the biggest demonstration London has seen since the Iraq War. From all over the country, protesters came to condemn the cuts in government spending.
Well, I think it's really important to show that millions of people are against government policy, and the cuts are being instituted far too quickly. People are really going to suffer.
There is a need for cuts, but it's the scale of the cuts and the rate of the cuts.
I'm coming out against the cuts that are affecting the most vulnerable in society, and the people who are making decisions have got all the money and they're cutting services to the most vulnerable.
They marched for hours through central London to a rally in Hyde Park, where the head of the Trades Union Congress, Brendan Barber, addressed the crowd.
We're here to send a clear message to the government that we're strong and that we're united, that we'll fight their savage cuts, and that we will not let them destroy people's services, people's jobs and people's lives.
There was also a very brief appearance from the leader of the opposition Labour Party, Ed Miliband.
I believe there is a need for difficult choices and some cuts, but this government is going too far and too fast, and they are destroying the things we value in our country.
The unions claim 250,000 people joined the demonstration. It was passionate and largely good-natured, though away from the main rally there has been some violence, including an incident described by this eyewitness.
In a matter of seconds, there was a group of about maybe 100 people walking down the road in black and reds, and then as quick as a flash, paint bombs started coming in, paint bombs. I got smacked on the head with one of the smoke bombs, people getting carried out by the police. People kept chucking stuff, sticks, stones, paint bombs, bottles, the works. There's people covered in blood, covered in paint. Yeah, pretty shaken up, to say the least.
Critics of the march say the protesters are exaggerating the scale of the cuts and offer no credible alternative.
Our political correspondent Rob Watson. Geraldine Ferraro, the first woman to run as a vice presidential candidate in the US, has died aged 75. The daughter of a seamstress and Italian immigrant, Geraldine Ferraro went on to become a lawyer and politician in the Democratic Party. She worked for Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign in 2008 until making an allegedly racist remark and speaking up for the Republican vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin. Farhana Darwood looks back at her life.
By the time Geraldine Ferraro ran as the first ever female vice presidential candidate for a major political party, she had already spent more than 10 years in public service, including 3 terms in the US House of Representatives. She hoped her long journey from a humble Italian family home to standing alongside the 1984 presidential candidate Walter Mondale would inspire Americans.
When Fritz Mondale asked me to be his running mate, he sent a powerful signal about the direction he wants to lead our country. American history is about doors being opened, doors of opportunity for everyone, no matter who you are, as long as you're willing to earn it.
She added considerable excitement to the election. In one of the most watched vice presidential debates in history, she put in this memorable performance against then-incumbent Vice President George Bush Sr.
I almost resent Vice President Bush, your patronizing attitude that you have to teach me about foreign policy. I've been a member of Congress for 6 years. I was there when the embassy was held hostage in Iran, and I have been there and I have seen what has happened in the past several months, 17 months with your administration. Secondly, please don't categorize my answers either. Leave the interpretation of my answers to the American people who are watching this debate.
However, as the campaign wore on, she was hounded by allegations of misconduct over her family's tax affairs, and the Democrats lost the election to a landslide Reagan victory. A teacher, a lawyer, a politician, an author and businesswoman, Geraldine Ferraro continued to work as a media commentator well into her 70s.
Farhana Darwood on Geraldine Ferraro, who's died aged 75. This is The World Today from the BBC.
Time now for World Sport from the BBC with me, Johnny O'Shea. Coming up.
Long ball forward now, looking for Young, and Young knocks it in, and Bent sweeps it in. Fantastic move, so simple from England.
England go top of their Euro 2012 qualifying group after victory over Wales. In Africa, Botswana enjoy an historic win in Chad, but the defending African champions Egypt are left on the brink of elimination, and Sri Lanka cruise past England to reach the Cricket World Cup semi-finals. International football continues to take centre stage this weekend with key games across Europe and Africa. In the pick of Saturday's Euro 2012 qualifiers, England defeated Wales 2-0 in Cardiff to go top of Group G. Watching the BBC's senior football reporter Ian Dennis.
After a difficult build-up to the game for Fabio Capello, the actual match was trouble-free. England suffocated Wales with their pressing game, and within a quarter of an hour, they were 2 up. James Collins' clumsy challenge on Ashley Young gave away a penalty converted by Frank Lampard after 7 minutes. Ashley Young's cross from the right was finished off by Darren Bent running in for his 3rd goal in 3 international games. Wales, poor in the first half, did improve after the break, but rarely threatened. King snatched at a shot, Ramsey fired over. This was a comfortable win for England, who have now moved to the top of Group G. Wales remain bottom after a 4th successive qualifying defeat.
The England captain John Terry says the victory puts them back on track in the qualifying campaign.
I think it does. As I said in the week, it was very important that we won the game, which is regardless of the way we played, which I thought, especially first half, I thought we played very well. Second half, a little bit, the lads felt a little bit tired. But, it moves us in the right direction, and that right direction is to, be top of the group, and hopefully by the end of this campaign, we're still at that first position.
The other match in Group G between Bulgaria and Switzerland ended 0-0. Rounding up the other key results from Europe, here's Nishat Ladder.
Thomas Muller and Miroslav Klose both scored twice as Germany eased to a 4-0 victory over Kazakhstan to open up a commanding 8-point lead in Group A. It's now a maximum 15 points from 5 games for the Germans. A header from Vasilis Torosidis with the last touch of the game helped 10-man Greece beat Malta 1-0 and move to the top of Group F. The former European champions move above Croatia, who'd earlier suffered a shock 1-0 defeat in Georgia. There's a 3-way tie for the lead at the top of Group B after Slovakia laboured to a 1-0 win over Andorra. They join Russia, who drew 0-0 in Armenia, and the Republic of Ireland, who are 2-1 winners over Macedonia. And a goal 9 minutes from time maintained Norway's unbeaten record in qualifying as Denmark missed the chance to pull level with their Scandinavian rivals at the top of Group H in a 1-1 draw.
Botswana have made it through to their first ever African Nations Cup after a famous 1-0 victory in Chad. This was one of several qualifiers on Saturday, including defending champions Egypt losing 1-0 in South Africa. Rounding up the action, BBC African Sports' Sunny Ibrahim.
Botswana became the first team to earn qualification for the 2012 Africa Cup of Nations. Their 1-0 victory over Chad in N'Djamena gives them 16 points, well clear at the top of Group K. It's the first time in their history that they've made the finals. 2 teams will go through from this group, and Malawi are in 2nd place after their 1-0 win over Togo in Blantyre. Defending champions Egypt are on the brink of elimination as Katlego Mfela's last kick of the game gave South Africa a 1-0 win in Group G. Elsewhere, a last-minute goal from Demba Ba helped Senegal to edge Cameroon 1-0 in Dakar, leaving the indomitable Lions vulnerable in Group E. Minos Cape Verde beat Liberia 4-2 to keep their stranglehold of Group A, and Uganda are on course for their first Nations Cup place in 32 years after a 1-0 win over Guinea-Bissau. Kenya and Tanzania are back in the hunt. They both came from behind to record 2-1 victories over Angola and Central African Republic, respectively.
So a famous day for Botswana, qualifying for the 2012 Cup to be held in Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. They top Group K and are guaranteed to not finish lower than 2nd. Their coach, Stanley Shosani, says they have a great team spirit.
We don't have a star. My players, they play as a team. Everyone is working for another one. So we are cooperating. We are team. We see our communication between us and the players is really, we are working as a team, like I said.
On Sunday, Ghana take on Congo. Now cricket, and Sri Lanka eased into the World Cup semi-finals after a 10-wicket victory over England in Colombo. After choosing to bat, England struggled to 229 for 6. In reply, Sri Lanka easily reached a winning 231 with 63 balls left to spare. With more details, our World Cup reporter Lee James.
Make no mistake, this was a strong statement from Sri Lanka to the remaining teams in the tournament. Upal Taranga and Tilakarani Dilshan totally dominated England's bowlers, making a potentially tricky target of 230 appear thoroughly insufficient. In front of a raucous home crowd, they oozed confidence with the ball travelling all around the ground. Dilshan made 108 and fittingly both reached their centuries when Taranga hit the winning runs, driving through the covers for 4 to reach 102. England's total should have been more competitive. Jonathan Trott's 86 and Owen Morgan's 50 gave them the ascendancy, only for a batting power play to scupper their chances again. It appeared to be a game too far for their weary side. Sri Lanka have injury concerns of their own and now only 2 days to recover before a semi-final with New Zealand.
A terrific performance then by Sri Lanka. Here's their captain, Kumar Sangakkara.
I thought we did exceptionally well to keep them at 220. Maybe a bit better work on the field might have actually dragged the total down. But the way Dilshan started off with that new ball, bowling his spell, and then where he and Upal Taranga approached their batting was just absolutely magnificent.
So England are out of the World Cup. A big defeat for their skipper Andrew Strauss to digest.
We knew our batting performance was under par, but we thought that pressure's a big man, and if we could get 2 or 3 early wickets, hopefully that might be enough to make that pressure count. Unfortunately, Dilshan and Taranga played outstandingly well, and it was a very flat wicket. If anything, it got flatter in the evening. So we were thoroughly outplayed. We lost to a better side, and we go home with our tail between our legs.
In a few hours' time, the first Grand Prix of the new Formula One season will get underway in Melbourne in Australia, with the reigning world champion Sebastian Vettel in pole position. He'll be joined on the front row by McLaren's Lewis Hamilton. The other Red Bull of Mark Webber and Hamilton's teammate Jenson Button will follow behind. Let's hear from the front two. Lewis Hamilton in a moment, but first here's the man on pole, Sebastian Vettel.
It feels nice to drive the car. It feels nice to go quicker than last year when we came here, even though the rules made it more tough for us to build a quick car. But all in all, that's, I think, a proof that the people back in the factory, back in Milton Keynes, and everyone here are trying to push as hard as we can and getting the car to where it is now.
The guys back at the factory never give up. The design team, the guys that are building components, and what a turnaround. I got in the car this weekend and I'll be a bit cautious, try not to be too optimistic, and in qualifying the car felt fantastic. Really, really did feel great, and I owe also the guys back at the factory, they should really be able to give themselves a real pat on the back.
In tennis, Roger Federer enjoyed a 6-3, 6-3 win over Radek Stepanek at the Miami Masters 1000 event and set up another career record in the process. The victory means he's now joined Pete Sampras in 7th in the all-time victory list with 762 career wins. Before we go, here's John Bennett with details of what to expect on Sports World on Sunday.
The race to qualify for the Africa Cup of Nations and Euro 2012 is really hotting up, so I'll be joined by an international football panel on Sports World this Sunday from 16 hours GMT. We'll also have the details from the Emirates Stadium where Brazil are taking on Scotland in a friendly match. There'll be all the reactions to the first Formula One Grand Prix of the season in Australia, plus the latest from the NBA, the Miami Open Tennis and the Cricket World Cup ahead of this week's semi-finals.
That's John Bennett. Be sure to join him on Sports World. That's from 15 hours GMT on Sunday. A reminder of our top story. England, Germany, the Republic of Ireland and Slovakia are amongst the winners in Saturday's Euro 2012 qualifiers. And Botswana have qualified for the 2012 Africa Cup of Nations for the first time. For now, that's the latest world sport from the BBC.
BBC. When news breaks, whether it happens on your doorstep or on another continent, there's a BBC programme where you can talk about it. World Have Your Say. Share your stories.
We're used to this fighting, war, embargo, whatever you call it.
Set the agenda.
The government owes it to the people to have trust and faith.
Tell us what you think.
It's really frustrating to see this whole thing unfolding.
The global conversation is going on 24 hours a day online.
Pascal, you're in Benghazi. Edwin's in Kenya. He's got in touch on Facebook.
Get in touch at World Have Your Say at bbc.com. World Have Your Say. On air, on TV and online from the BBC.
If you missed an edition of Outlook or want to hear one of those extraordinary personal stories again, listen online or subscribe to our podcast at bbcworldservice.com/Outlook.
It's exactly hour, so we'll have a summary of news in a few seconds. After that, taking us up to the next full bulletin, 2 programmes, Over to You, which considers the impact of the language services closing this week and the effect of their demise. Before that, it's another letter from naturalist David Attenborough. Today, he tells of the remarkable home life of the periodic cicada, whose eggs lie underground for exactly 17 years, and the perils of filming in a nunnery. First, though, a quick update from the newsroom.
BBC News with Michael Poles. France says its fighter aircraft have destroyed at least 5 Libyan government warplanes and 2 helicopters in an attack on the forces of Colonel Gaddafi. A French spokesman said the aircraft were destroyed at their base at the town of Misrata, the only big rebel stronghold left in western Libya, which has been under attack for several weeks. There have been more anti-government protests in Syria, with crowds again taking to the streets. The headquarters of the ruling Ba'ath Party were burned down in 2 places, Latakia and Tafas. In the southern city of Deraa, the scene of the biggest anti-government protest in Syria so far, the security forces allowed mourners to attend a funeral procession for those killed on Friday. Following escalating violence, the Palestinian movement controlling the Gaza Strip, Hamas, has agreed with other militant groups to enforce a ceasefire with Israel, provided Israel stops attacking Gaza. The Palestinian President, Mahmoud Abbas, has held a rare meeting with Hamas officials in the West Bank. More than 250,000 people from around Britain have taken part in a march and rally in central London to protest against public spending cuts. Mainly peaceful, it was the biggest protest in Britain since a rally opposing the imminent invasion of Iraq 8 years ago. On the eve of an important regional election in Germany, about 200,000 people have demonstrated against nuclear power. Analysts believe Chancellor Angela Merkel's support for nuclear energy could cost her party defeat in the state of Baden-Württemberg for the first time in 6 decades. The United Nations nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, has sent extra teams to Japan, where the nuclear plant wrecked in the earthquake and tsunami remains unstable. It said there appeared to be high levels of contamination in the Fukushima prefecture. The BBC Russian service has made its last radio broadcast after 65 years. A limited audio service will continue via the internet on bbcrussian.com. BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service, and it's time now for Life Stories, a letter written and presented by David Attenborough.
In 1633, 13 years after the Pilgrim Fathers had landed on Plymouth Rock in New England, their little colony was struck by a plague. Suddenly, and within the space of just 4 days, their houses, their fields, their orchards were covered by literally millions of red-eyed insects. They were a good 1.5 inches long and had huge transparent wings which they held closed over their somewhat shorter bodies. These extraordinary creatures emerged from the ground and crawled up into the trees and onto the house walls, and there they sang. The noise was ear-splitting, somewhat like a circular saw hitting a metal nail. People had to shout to make themselves heard. One farmer said he couldn't even hear the bells around his cattle's necks, although he could see that they were ringing. The Pilgrims, of course, were devout Christians, and some of them maintained that this was a plague of locusts, like that with which Jehovah had threatened the land of Egypt. According to the Bible, Jehovah said that they would cover the face of the earth, that one cannot be able to see the earth, and that they should fill the houses, and the houses of thy servants, and the houses of all the Egyptians which thy father, nor thy father's father, have seen since the day that they were put on the earth unto this day. Well, that certainly fitted. But other colonists disputed this. The Bible also says that these locusts, when they did come, did eat every herb of the land and all the fruit of the trees, and there remained not any green thing in the trees or in the herbs of the field. And these red-eyed bugs didn't do exactly that. They did, however, destroy much of the vegetation, because they laid eggs on the leaves which then turned brown. Maybe they were not locusts, but giant flies. Whatever they were certainly a plague, and unlike any that the settlers had seen before. And then suddenly, after some 3 weeks, all these strange insects died. Hundreds of thousands of the bodies lay in great drifts over the face of the land and were eaten up by the colony's pigs. The plague, whatever it was over. Nor did it reappear the following year or the year after that. But in 1650, 17 years after the first plague, the red-eyed insects reappeared. Once again the land echoed with their calls, and once again, within a month, they all died. Another 17 years passed, and it happened again. And so it's gone on happening at 17-year intervals ever since. For these extraordinary insects were not flies, nor were they locusts, though some local people still today call them that. They were cicadas, periodic cicadas. The eggs, laid by the females in slits that they cut in stems and branches, hatch after 6 to 8 weeks. The larva, a small maggot, drops to the ground and burrows into the soil. They remain underground for exactly 17 years. But they don't all break through to the daylight immediately. Instead, each builds a little mud turret around itself on the surface, and there it waits. Perhaps that's to allow those that are a little late to catch up. Maybe it's to wait for the weather to be exactly to their liking. Whatever the reason, the moment comes when they all start to emerge together. As they crawl out, their skins split and reveal the fully formed red-eyed adults, in thousands, in tens of thousands. How, lying in the darkness below ground, do they know when the time has come for them to return to the surface? It could be that they're aware of the passage of each year by the changes in the sap that they're drinking, which clearly is not the same in winter when the tree growth has stopped, as it is in summer. But that only puts the puzzle back a stage. Even if they do know that once again summer has come, how did they count and know that this is the 17th summer? It certainly can't have anything to do with the weather in any one particular year, because there are a dozen different populations of these cicadas in North America, each of which keeps to its own 17-year cycle, but starting in different years. And to complicate things still further, there's another different species that works on a 13-year cycle. It lives farther south in the United States. In places, the ranges of these two species overlap, and someone has worked out that every 221 years, the lucky or unfortunate inhabitants of a few cities in the central United States can expect the simultaneous arrival of both species. The fact is, however, that no one has yet worked out what clock any periodic cicadas use to coordinate their lives. Nevertheless, they do all emerge within 3 days. Why should they all do so simultaneously? Well, it certainly ensures that males will find females. And it's also a good survival tactic, for the local birds and other creatures in the neighborhood that might eat them can't possibly deal with the enormous numbers that they're faced with. So the great majority of cicadas survive to breed, and once again, the people are deafened. It's only the males that call. They have a chamber on either side of the first segment of their abdomen, which has a circular membranous wall. This is attached to a muscle which, as it contracts, distorts the membrane so that when the muscle relaxes, the membrane snaps back. As it does so, it makes a click, in much the same way as you can make a click with a dented tin can by pressing it, except that the cicada can do that up to 180 times a second. The noise is then amplified by a huge internal resonating chamber so large that it occupies most of the insect's abdomen, and its gut, stomach, and other internal organs have to be squeezed into a small section at the far end. The males caw as they fly. The females sit on the branches listening. When one is ready to mate, she responds with a quick upwards flick of her wings. This makes a clicking noise, faint by comparison with the deafening calls of the males. You can't help wondering how the males can hear it in the din that they're making. But you can easily prove that it's the sound of the wing flick that attracts the male, because you can call him with a click of your fingers. I tried it. A male zoomed by and I snapped my fingers. He changed course visibly. I clicked again, and he landed on my wrist, and I was able to persuade him to walk up my forearm as I snapped the fingers of my other hand in front of him. We filmed all this in the grounds of a nunnery in Baltimore. It was a beautiful setting with plenty of small trees, the branches of which were low enough for us to see that they were thick with insects. The director gave me my instructions. I had to start about 15 yards away from the camera, walk towards it, speaking as I came, and end up immediately behind a horizontal branch that was at roughly eye level and covered with the singing male cicadas. I set off. "Stop, stop, stop," said the cameraman. "Look behind you." And there, some distance away, was a small minibus slap in the middle of the picture. As we watched, the door of the minibus opened and a dozen or so old ladies emerged. Each of them carried a long wand, holding it vertically in front of her, and started to look for a place to stick it into the ground. We walked over and explained what we were doing. They were most interested. Yes, indeed, the locusts are extraordinary, aren't they? Most interesting. And what were they doing? Well, one of them told us, "We spent our lives very happily in this nunnery, and now we're selecting the place where each of us would like to be buried." So, as we were filming creatures in the foreground, clambering up out of the earth, they, in the background, were making arrangements to go down into it. They thought the notion was highly entertaining. "And will we be appearing on television?" they asked. But the director said that he thought it would be better if we reshot the scene.
Life Stories was written and presented by David Attenborough, and the programme was produced in Bristol by Julian Hector of the BBC Natural History Unit. This is the BBC World Service. BBC World Service, and now it's Over to You.
Hello, this is Rajan. You've reached the Over to You answer phone. Please leave a message after the tone.
Hello, I'm Rajan Datta, and this is Over to You, your platform to express your views on the World Service and where we examine important issues in the wider media world. And this week, the World Service itself is that important issue. As it says goodbye to a number of its cherished language services, we reflect on what they have meant to you, the listeners. From the Caribbean...
Bonjour, moi c'est Colleen Foster. Moi c'est Simone Degraff. Ou attendez émission Connexion Haïti BBC. Objectif.
To Serbia, Macedonia and Albania.
When you have a feedback from the listeners, it's really rewarding. And when I realized that we are going to stop broadcasting to them, I felt a kind of a void because of them.
And we have some memories of the World Service in Europe.
Thursday the 5th of August. Dear Kitty, with close attention, we are listening to the BBC. Gathered around the baby radio we sit.
Over to you.
Operator.
It's been a momentous and for some people heartbreaking few weeks as the Albanian, Macedonian, Portuguese for Africa and Serbian language sections as well as the Caribbean Regional Service all made their final broadcasts. They've gone as part of the BBC's plans to meet the 16% savings target required by the UK government spending review. The Caribbean service, which came off air on Friday, has a long and distinguished history dating back to the start of the Second World War. Many listeners now mourn its loss. First this from Leonardo Christie.
We know we are a small nation that many in the world view as insignificant and unimportant. But I still believe we deserve some level of respect. We, just like others all over the world, listen to the BBC. Is the Caribbean only seen by the British as a holiday destination?
And from Sean Lebert.
Please remember that many regions are decades behind in their perception of sexuality, freedom of speech, democracy and human rights issues. To cut the service now would be tantamount to slowing our march to greater justice and freedom.
So, it's goodbye to this much-loved institution, and to mark that, I met its head, Debbie Ransom, and she brought with her some favourite moments.
This is Una Boston introducing West Indians in Britain.
We've declared the country as a national disaster, and we're looking at the possibility of a state of emergency.
It's 11 minutes after 6 in Port-au-Prince, after surely what must have been one of the most miserable nights in the history of the capital of Haiti, a country.
Bonjour, moi c'est Colleen Foster. Moi c'est Simone Degraff. Ou attendez émission Connexion Haïti BBC. Objectif nous simple.
Debbie joined the World Service in London in 1991 from Radio Trinidad. I asked her what she feels has been the Caribbean Service's biggest contribution.
I think because it's very much mapped the relationship between Britain and the Caribbean, because of course the original programme was called In the West Indies with Una Marsden, and that had been for British soldiers who lived in the West Indies. They were British citizens, they had British passports, who came up and fought in World War II. So it allowed them, as a Sunday tea time programme, they called home and said, Auntie, I'm okay, I'm not going to the front yet. And then it developed into the literary, calling the Caribbean programme that we know that launched the careers of Anai Paul, George Lamin, Sam Selvin. Need I go on?
So we're originally talking about the 1940s, and now we are still saying that there is a very strong connection in the 21st century between the Caribbean nations and the World Service.
I think the response to the announcement of the closure has indicated, yes, people still do have that sense of affinity. They may be in the American satellite footprint, but they have a fondness for Britain, British values, British independence, and as many of them said in the emails to us, typified in the BBC.
You've been quoted as using words like shock, disappointment and hurt about the announcement. It's obviously not something that you took very easily. Explain to me why personally you felt so strongly about it.
I think because it came off such a year of highs. Okay, news is always a high off the back of somebody else's tragedy. So of course it was a year of the Haiti earthquake. Then we were a part of the Connexion Haiti, which had been the Creole Lifeline programme. So two of my Creole speaking producers had been a part of that, and that felt so good. We won an AIB award, Association of International Broadcasting Award, for that. That felt great. Then we broke the story of Gregory Isaacs' death. A hard one again, calling a family in mourning as of 1 hour.
Gregory Isaacs, the reggae
singer. And the reggae superstar, we ended up as a sort of, what was it, top global tweet, major story, Washington Post, everybody quoting BBC Caribbean. And then came back to Haiti a year on with Haiti Tent Tales, letting people talk about their lives a year on in Creole. So after a year like that, yes, a bit of a shock.
Some people might say, well, why does the Caribbean, why do the West Indies need a specific service? Surely they can listen to the World Service in English, listen to this programme and other programmes on the usual networks. Why did you feel it was necessary?
Well, of course they can. You know, World Service in English will continue to provide the valuable service as it does for the whole world. What we provided was the Caribbean-specific service, which is not done in the Caribbean, that independent reporting, that joining of the dots, because even the islands with 30-plus stations, it's about island broadcasting. I know, I've worked there, it's great fun. You cover the island. You may cover the island next door if there's a fishing dispute. But the issue of joining the dots, so if this happens in Guyana or Trinidad, what does it mean in Jamaica? It's that joining the dots across the Caribbean to London and back.
So, the plan is what? I mean, you do want to leave a legacy, you do want to make sure there is something there that replaces this service. Where are you looking? What are you looking at?
Well, I mean, from the BBC's point of view, there will be our legacy website, and also all of that rich material from over the years. The BBC has agreed that we are giving as an endowment to the University of the West Indies. So future students, researchers looking at that day-to-day pan-Caribbean toing and froing in the news and current affairs field can get that material. In terms of what happens in the region, there really is a major debate, even up to the other night. My email box just full with the great and the good saying, we do need to do this for ourselves, as the British are not going to help us. How do we do it? How do we fund it? Where do we base it?
That was Debbie Ransom. And if you have any comments to add on this or anything else you've been listening to on the World Service, this is how you can contact Over to You.
Call us on 44144 960 9000. Email over to you at bbc.co.uk. SMS 4477 86 202006.
Now to your postbag, which once again is dominated by reactions from Europe to the ending of the 648 medium wave service. Lorne Walters rang us to draw attention to a recent Oscar-winning film.
I just wanted to point out that the King's Speech, the original one back in the 30s of King George VI, and the award-winning movie of the same name, The King's Speech, would have never been able to happen without the BBC World Service. So just to remind ourselves that this is World Heritage stuff, we can't just throw it in the dustbin under the pretext of budget cuts. I'm sure that there is available funding available. We can't not recognize the extreme unparalleled value of such important reporting sources.
Meanwhile, Hazel Bargiel from Chevreuse in France has found a way to continue to listen to the World Service. But first, she had something to say about the decision to replace the interview with Hard Talk.
I learned with horror that the interview was to be taken off air. Worse still, it was compared to Hard Talk, which is supposed to make up for the loss. I've invested in an internet radio so that I can keep listening to what's left of the World Service beyond the end of March. And I'm very pleased with it. The radio, that is. Though I'm not so sure about the World Service.
However, not all of the emails were about the end of 648 medium wave. The coverage of the disaster in Japan prompted this from Sam Hare.
Why do you think it is newsworthy to needle those who have lost their loved ones? Lack of consideration and sensitivity pushes your interviewers into recording and broadcasting the harrowing occasion of a husband looking for his wife in a mortuary. Have you no better feelings?
And I'd be interested to know what you think about Sam Hare's point there. Now back to the language services, which have said their final goodbyes. We turn to the other 4 of the 5 that are going. Here with their thoughts are Alexei Zoric, head of the Serbian service, Zanyeta Shkelev, head of the Macedonian service, Ilija Nishku, head of the Albanian section, and Teresa Lima, head of the Portuguese in Africa service.
Slušate BBC.
Dobro veče, ovde London.
Obruč oko Gaddafija se steže.
When I joined the BBC World Service in January 92, what used to be the multi-ethnic Federation of Yugoslavia had just exploded into several monochromatic nationalistic republics, some of which were at war with each other. I came from Belgrade in a time where you couldn't telephone to Zagreb, for instance, which is the capital of Croatia. And suddenly, I was in Bush where everything seemed possible. And I think that we succeeded in building on that. We succeeded in keeping open the conversation so that people could hear voices from the quote-unquote other side. And I hope that would have helped.
The former head of the BBC's Serbian service, Alexei Zoric, there. The language services in the Balkans have been part of that region's history. Their role to broadcast impartial news into a far from neutral political environment is one that the Macedonian services, Zanyeta Shkelev, remembers well.
I could think of Bosnia War and how we reported on that. Our reporting was well measured, balanced. I remember at one point I was sitting with a stopwatch timing, so 20 seconds for the government spokesman and 20 seconds for the rebels. So we were that careful to be really balanced, even physically balanced, if you understand me.
Like all the language sections, one of the aims of the Albanian service was to use the BBC's model of journalism. Ilija Nishku ran the Albanian service.
It was very important for BBC being in the middle as a news source for people, but also as a model to be followed, which is one of the things we've been stressing during years. And BBC Albanian, in cooperation with the Trust and BBC Training, we've been involved in many training programs, training local journalists, bringing them to London. So, yeah, this has been one of our missions, so not only providing the news, but also being a model how a news organization should work.
Ora vjet. BBC Sot, BBC Sot, BBC Sot.
Po dëgjoni BBC në Shqip.
Me programin.
I remember we had a bus tour throughout Macedonia then, and people would meet and greet us, and we would talk about the World Service and what we do and what we aim to do. So we started very, very well. We were wanted and we were liked and we were very well received.
For some of the Balkan countries, having their own BBC language service signalled to the population that they were being recognised internationally.
Well, when we started, there was a big excitement in Macedonia because at that period Macedonia was trying to get wider recognition as a country. It was a young, independent country. So there was a big excitement because people thought that Macedonian language was recognized by the BBC and became part of the family of 43 languages at that time.
Far from the Balkan arena, another of the BBC's 43 language sections was the Portuguese for Africa service. Teresa Lima is its former head.
The loss is much powerful because we feel that we are not serving them anymore. And because the message they sent to us saying that how empty they will feel after we stopped our transmission. So it's really painful.
One of the reasons behind the loss of these services in particular is that many of the countries are on the road to recovery after earlier conflicts. But there are worries that the language services are still needed.
While in Mozambique you have a lot of independent newspapers and emergent radio stations and things like that, in Angola it's not like that. There are a lot of new kind of media groups, but I think it's a way of trying to apparently say to the world, you know, we have freedom of press, but in the end of the day, they are not free at all. They are really controlled by the state, by the government.
Serbia is far from where it was in the 90s, that is true. But on the other hand, the media scene in Serbia is not as developed as one would like it to be. The media is controlled either by the political circles or by the money circles, and usually those two go together. The example of the Serbian service, of the BBC actually, in Serbian, was an example of an impartial, objective and fair media. We spoke to everyone, we presented anyone's point of view, which is not often done in the media in Serbia.
Above all, it's the relationships with their audiences that these former service heads say they'll miss most. Teresa Lima again.
I think when you have a feedback from the listeners, it's really rewarding. When the listeners talk to you every day, react to your analysis, to your questions, and I think it's one of the most touching feelings that I have. And when I realized that we are going to stop broadcasting to them, I felt a kind of a void because of them.
Over to you.
The final word on the closures comes from Hans Bart in the Netherlands, who wanted to emphasise the importance of being able to receive the medium wave service on a radio anywhere in Europe. Hans reminded us of this extract from the diary of a 13-year-old girl who, as Hans said, also listened to the service 68 years ago in his home city of Amsterdam.
Thursday the 5th of August. Dear Kitty, with close attention, we are listening to the BBC. Gathered around the baby radio we sit, and these are the only moments when the members of the back house don't interrupt each other, because someone is speaking who even Mr. Van Daan cannot contradict.
Hans Bart there, reminding us of the diary of Anne Frank. That's all for this week. Just to say, we at Over to You are not untouched by the cuts, and from next week we'll be just under 10 minutes long, but packing just as powerful a punch, we hope. And that depends on you. What do you think of all the changes that have hit the language services, and quite a few programmes on the English network? So keep those emails, texts and phone calls coming. And for now, from me, Rajan Datta, goodbye and thanks for listening.
Over to you.
And if you'd like to contact the programme, you can phone on 44 144 960 9000. That's 44 144 960 9000. Or you can send an SMS message to 447786 2020 06. 447786 2020 06. Or you can email the programme at overtoyou, that's all one word, overtoyou at bbc.co.uk. Over to You was a City Broadcasting production for the BBC World Service.
BBC. Monarchy is not only relevant for today's world, it can also be the fairest and by far the most representative form of government on earth.
I think it's completely wrong to build society on a principle with inherited monarchy.
A monarchist and a republican. We hand the microphone
over to them. For king or country. Tuesday at 8, 13 and 19 GMT on BBC World Service.
Every Wednesday, Heart and Soul explores the role of faith, spirituality and religion in our everyday lives. And if you miss an episode, you can download it as a weekly podcast at bbcworldservice.com.
This is the BBC in Naples,
Tel Aviv,
Perth, Accra.
Wherever you are, you're with the BBC.
Ura je 1.
Skupni nočni program lokalnih in regionalnih radijskih postaj Slovenije. Novice.
Poslanci Državnega zbora so ta teden opravili prvo obravnavo novele zakona o kmetijskih zemljiščih, katere namen je zagotoviti učinkovitejša orodja za varstvo kmetijskih zemljišč. Kot kaže, bo Državni zbor podprl nadaljnjo obravnavo novele. Še največ pomislekov so sicer podali v SNS-u in SDS-u, kjer so denimo proti odškodnini zaradi spremembe namembnosti kmetijskega zemljišča. Ameriški predsednik Barack Obama je včeraj v rednem radijskem nagovoru ocenil, da je operacija Odisejeva zora uspešna, jasna in osredotočena, ter da so z njo uspeli rešiti številne nedolžne ljudi pred prelivom.